Hello and happy Independence Day from all of us at the Jerusalem Post. My name's Shifra Jacobs, I'm the studio manager, and I had the pleasure of sitting down with Danyelle Neuman, the Chief Development Officer for the Jewish Agency. Danyelle oversees the global fundraising for the Jewish Agency, and her passion for Israel and Judaism struck me so much when we sat down for our interview. She talks about how the Jewish Agency allows for a safe haven for Jews all around the world and in Israel itself. On this Independence Day, it's important to be grateful for our country and for the organizations that help Jews in Israel and the diaspora. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Danyelle.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before we get started, can you kind of give a little introduction about who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Danyelle Neuman. I'm the Chief Development Officer of the Jewish Agency for Israel. As you can hear, I wasn't born in Israel. I made aliyah 14 years ago from New York, although I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
So what do you do?
I think about the annual goals of the Jewish Agency for Israel, the big goals, where we want to be, and how to figure out how to bring resources and make partnerships to make that happen.
Let's get straight into it.
Yeah.
If we kind of think about the last, I would say, 7-ish years, we've kind of been through many different eras of the world, not even just in Israel, but globally. We had the pandemic, we've had the war. What has changed since, and it's obviously a broad question, but let's maybe go back even just to Corona, when that was starting. How did that shift the way that your work looked like?
I think before Corona, and for many years, the Jewish Agency is an organization that constantly needs to change to keep up with the times, and we learn from hearing from donors and communities around the world. So COVID hits, and one of the first phone calls that at the time Chairman Herzog, today President Herzog, receives is from the Jewish community in Milan. And they share their problems. As you remember, Italy was one of the first places to be hit, and they have no money for Chevra Kadisha. They have no rabbis who are working, and calls Chairman Herzog and says, we could really use the help of the Jewish Agency. And he says, well, why are you calling us? And she said, I don't know who else to call. And I think that there's this realization that all of a sudden, first of all, the Jewish Agency has become the switchboard for the Jewish people. You don't know who to call, you call the Jewish Agency.
Right.
And especially a figure at the time like Chairman Herzog, who had so many connections around the world and everyone had a personal relationship with him, that was an important phone call to make. So we begin to say, okay, Jewish communities, particularly small ones, non-federation communities, Jewish federations, thank God, are able to support themselves. But look at what's happening around the world. The Jewish Agency is the address. At one point, we realized that we have to take care of hundreds of small Jewish communities around the world. On the other hand, Jewish communities who were traditionally the supporters have more and more needs. So if you turn to a Jewish community and say, guys, Milan really needs your help, whereas maybe a few years earlier, that would have been like, great. Now Jewish communities had their own problems. Rising security needs. Obviously, COVID hit every single Jewish community in the world. So the Jewish Agency finds itself, on one hand, as the organization who needs the resources to respond, and on the other hand, has to think differently about who can respond to it. So I think that sets us on a course of thinking much, much more globally, both in terms of partnerships and what partnerships of the future looks like, and the trajectory of Jewish communities around the world who are going to need more and more assistance. Little did we know how much assistance they would need, not only health-wise, but in today's world that turns into security and resiliency and all these things we could have never anticipated.
So it's almost like that in itself was sort of like the door opening to all of these new, unprecedented challenges, where it's like something new that isn't part of the regular routine. And from that point until even today, and it continues, I'm sure it will, the next year, even more so, there'll be more things that, you're going to have to try and understand how to navigate. But that's kind of like the beginning. And then we kind of move into this sort of like we thought COVID was the event. And then obviously, we have October 7th and
well, before that, first of all, we have Shomer Chomot, Guardian of the Walls in May of 21,
right,
where Ashkelon, Ashdod all of a sudden are under fire in a way that we couldn't have anticipated. And then we have February 24th, 2022, where, of course, Ukraine is attacked by Russia, and there are 250,000 Jews living, or 200,000 Jews, living in Ukraine. And Many of them want to make aliyah. Many of them want to escape. And we're there. We're inside Ukraine already. And we put a lot of resources into rescuing Jews to get out of Ukraine and to make it safely first across the border, and then to make it to Israel if that's where they choose.
What did that look like as it was happening, specifically in your role?
So the first thing that happens is that, first of all, let's be honest, we had contingency plans. The Russians, it came as a surprise to almost no one. They had been troops on the border. So the Jewish Agency at any given time has contingency plans for anything around the world. Obviously, if we see an economic crisis starting in, a country in South America, we understand that could have very serious impact on the Jewish community there. And so we always have contingency plans, and it was no different here. Almost overnight, the Jewish Agency opens 19 facilities in 4 border countries.
Wow.
So for me, first of all, I sit back and say, thank God we've had partners like the Jewish Federations, like Karen Hayesod and others over all these many, many years. That means that we have operating staff in 4 border countries, right? We don't have to invent border staff. We don't have to invent the fact that we have currency, banks, relationships with governments where we could say, guys, this is what has to do. It's already in place. If you had been to the border, and I was at the border, literally as you cross into Poland, the first tent you saw was the Jewish Agency with a huge flag of the state of Israel. I get emotional even as I say that, because imagine, I'm the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors. Poland was not a place where you saw a flag and said, oh, I'm safe here.
Right on the border as well.
Right on the border.
It's, as you said that, I got a bit...
even non-Jews saw this. It wasn't just us, just to see that, the state of Israel, the Jewish Agency welcomes you. You're safe.
Yeah.
And again, whether you chose to make aliyah or not after that, you should know that the Jewish people, and we do everything on behalf of the Jewish people, where we're saying the Jewish people want to give you this bowl of soup, the Jewish people want to give you a hug and tell you that you're safe. So for us, that sprang into action. So for me personally, though, so first of all, just, being able to talk about the organization and the fact that as we used to say, as others rushed out, we rushed in. We sent our shlichim in. We made sure that anyone who wanted to get, any Jew that wanted to get on a train, bus, cab, they got there. Again, whether they were coming to Israel or not, we would find out later. But if they said we're Jewish and we want to escape, we facilitated that. We, as in the Jewish people, everything we do is on behalf of our donors and the Jewish people. And frankly, the phone calls started coming in every day. I would report to my then CEO, okay, we got $1 million today. And I would say that half-heartedly, I cannot believe that we have to be raising money for this. I cannot believe that Jews are not safe and we have to be rescuing them. And on the other hand, look what these amazing gifts are allowing us to do. They're allowing us to resettle people in Israel and to save their lives. And then for us, of course, the story also became people who wanted to leave Russia. So if 18,000, 19,000 people left Ukraine, 100,000 people left Russia to make aliyah, specifically to start a new life. So the Jewish Agency was bringing a lot of people to Israel.
Is that the number from the beginning of the war with Ukraine?
That's the number from the beginning of the war with Ukraine.
Wow. It's a huge number.
It's a huge number.
Wow. It really shows that idea of no matter where you are, there's going to be a place on the ground where you can turn to, which, as you said, we're just coming off of, while we're recording this, Yom HaShoah was just last week. It's something that is very, very special and we can't take for granted.
Of course, I think about had Israel been here, when my grandparents needed to get out. It's not different.
And you know what is also kind of amazing? It's actually not that long afterwards. If you think about history in the world, it's not even 100 years. So it is crazy. And, I think a lot of times you have to be thankful for, what we have now. Moving on to sort of, I guess, more of the war and, what started to happen in Israel. Again, there's another shift, I'm sure, in your work once October 7th happens, because it's not just about Jews in the diaspora. It's also Jews in Israel. It's Jews all around the world. Everybody is affected. Nobody really knows what's going on at the beginning as well. So I kind of want to go back to then. I know it's a bit hard. It was obviously a hard topic. But what were those first few days like?
So we'll start with the first few hours. So again, I give full credit to our partners and the many, many years of building what I call, the quiet infrastructure, the dollars no one ever sees where my dollar went to. Well, it was building this system of infrastructures, whether it was on the 4 border countries in Ukraine or here in Israel. So that morning by 8 a.m., the senior staff of the Jewish Agency was on the phone trying to understand from different perspectives. We have 8,000 people here in Israel who live under our care, maybe even more at the time. Olim in absorption centers, elderly living in Amigur facilities. We take care of all, and of course, Masa participants, people on long-term Israel experience. So the number of people who, quote unquote, lives are in our hands is probably at about 20,000 at that point. And so we first of all have to get a status check on all of them.
Right.
The second thing we have to do is see the status of our Victims of Terror Fund. The Jewish Agency has had a Victims of Terror Fund for 22 years, gives out grants to civilians in Israel who have faced an act of terror. And it's not about the money, it's about that we're the first place that hospitals begin calling. We're the first place the government calls to say there's been an act of terror. So we ask our professional who's in charge of that, okay, what calls have you been coming in? To make a long story short, we do this sort of, roundabout of all the key professionals who manage different things. Our current CEO, Yehuda Seton of the Jewish Agency, was the head of our management forum. So he's sort of getting status reports. And they asked me to, do a check and see our first, how much we think we're going to need to deal with this. The first needs, what we call a needs document that probably came out at 10 or 11 that morning. And it was something like $3 million. I mean, that's how little we understood of the magnitude of the event. We understood it was serious, but we had no idea of the magnitude.
Like most Israelis, by 10 a.m., I'm trying to think about what I was doing. I wasn't even close to understanding what was happening at that point.
So we at the Jewish Agency go into action mode right away. We start doing phone calls. Now, because I'm apparently not so bright, I understand that there are some key donors. The head of JFNA was in Israel at the time, the head of the New York Federation. And I spoke to them and say, why don't we go down tomorrow on the 8th of October and visit people who have been affected in Barzilai Hospital? Again, I can say now was foolish. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. Right. We had no idea. We didn't know that there were still terrorists on the loose. We didn't know. As we stood in Barzilai Hospital on the 8th, its maternity wing was struck by a rocket while we're in the building. I mean, this is, and we're on the roads. And I only say this as a means of saying we had literally no idea how serious this is. Again, numbers weren't coming in quickly. We didn't know who was lost. Like everyone else, we were figuring out the situation. Within days, we understood that the numbers were much, much higher than we had anticipated. The role of the Jewish Agency would be much, much larger. And then I would say the other thing that happened at the same time, and I think that this was a watershed moment for Israelis understanding people living abroad, was we began to see reports here of what was happening on American college campuses, particularly American. And I think Israelis, and you're an Israeli, so you can tell me what you think, but I think for Israelis for the first time also said, wow, Americans are going through something too.
Yeah, I think that it was kind of easy, especially I would say in the last 15 years, kind of we've done articles on this as well. Right? It's sort of this one's a golden age for Jews living abroad, where right. It's you feel like antisemitism is kind of a thing of the past, even though it never really is. And people right. People that are older than you are always telling you, hey, don't think that. But it's those moments where you're like, no, everything's open and everything's fine. And then there were these moments where all of a sudden I think younger people were like, actually, it's not. And those pieces of advice that we had before that people were giving us saying, it's never going to matter because at the end of the day, you're always going to be a Jew. All of a sudden, it had so much more weight to it. And it was kind of a huge shock, I think, for a lot of people. And if we go, I guess, to what was happening on campuses and sort of just all around the world, I mean, the rise of anti-Semitism, what did that start to look like within the Jewish Agency's work? Because the spike was huge.
So first of all, the Jewish Agency, in partnership with many foundation federations, of course, we have what we call Shlichei Campus in partnership with Hillel. We have Shlichim on I think probably 100-something campuses across North America and Europe that are literally there, an Israeli on campus where you can go to talk about the issue. So first of all, we have to now give new instructions to these Shlichim. How do they talk about what's going on in Israel? How do they become this, safe space for Jews who can no longer go to classes, who no longer, can feel safe in their dorms or conversations. So that's one angle we have, is our shlichim that are already on the campuses and what that does to them. By the way, as Israelis, they also want to be back here. So we also have to figure out, how to help them understand that one of the best ways they can serve the state of Israel is to remain where they are and assist students. We actually opened a new program we call J-Ready to start beginning to help communities figure out how to share resources. We actually opened it during Corona, so I'm glad you started with that, because that has led to all these other things. We started it during Corona to help communities figure out how to open synagogues safely and to be able to be a resource to one another, right? A community in Paris probably could help a community in Buenos Aires and Mexico City and Atlanta. So our J-Ready network has been a huge form of resilience and helping communities, with anything that they need. Many Jewish communities around the world, again, don't have resources. So there are things that we can share on behalf of World Jewry. And then there's just some information we can share that doesn't really cost anything. And our shlichim around the world, we have this, just to take a moment of pride, we have 3,000 shlichim, the largest number ever, who are in communities around the world, summer camps, college campuses, communities, and all of these people need to help connect people to Israel in a time that's very difficult.
Very. And I want to ask you, because, you're sort of really in this, but philanthropically, how has things changed since October 7th? Because the need and the support, and again, this is both within Israeli communities and within Jewish communities in the diaspora, it's shifted beyond something that I think it would have been very hard to sort of pinpoint and say, this is how we're going to need to be prepared. So what have you seen? Sorry, I know that it could also be like a long answer because, so much has happened. I feel like every month it's something new. But what has that been like?
First of all, let's take post-October 7th. All of a sudden, there was a surge in philanthropic, let me say it differently, in NGOs who were created just to solve some of the issues that came out of October 7th. All of the work done was great. The work that the Jewish Agency does is 100 years old, and it's going to, please God, continue for another 100 years. So while we saw a lot of these organizations become active after October 7th, most of them have shut their doors today. So that's interesting that, philanthropy was divided very broadly. If you look at, central organizations, I think JFNA reports that they gave to over 500 organizations following October 7th. Probably a good number of them aren't operating either at the same level or at all today. So one of the good things about the long-term sort of working with the Jewish Agency is that we're there yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And again, like I've said, we have all these years of infrastructure that we've invested in municipalities in Israel and in resources. I'll even give you one more example, right? One thing that happened after October 7th was sort of the collapse of a lot of small businesses, reservist businesses in the South, businesses in the North. For 30 years, the Jewish Agency has had loan funds working with small businesses. And again, thanks to our partners who supported it and allowed us to do this work. But the way I think about the Jewish Agency after October 7th, and I'll get back to philanthropy, is that we looked around. We're the largest Jewish organization in the world by far. We looked around at all of our resources and said, how can we use each and every one of those to help bring rehabilitation to the state of Israel? So if our, small business fund before was serving little projects, we said, okay, let's make this all about reservists. Let's make it all about bringing businesses back to Otef. Let's help the North, which has collapsed, whose economy relied so heavily. So first of all, this idea of this huge world of NGOs, which has shrunk down today, and some good ones probably grew as a result of October 7th and will continue to do good work. And we partner with a lot of them and we wish a lot of them well. And I think a lot of organizations that had not previously supported Jewish causes or Israel had, drew a line in the sand and said, okay, it's time for us to move our philanthropy to Israel.
I heard a lot of those.
A lot. There was a foundation I worked with who had given us a one-time donation after Ukraine and said, don't call us again. We're not in the supporting Israel business. We want to help you. We understand you're an effective way to rescue Jews. And it wasn't a mean thing. They just said, we just don't have the same interests. Since then, that foundation has closed the office that they had in South Africa as a result of what South Africa brought us to The Hague, and opened an office in Israel. I mean, so you have some philanthropy that did huge shifts. One of the foundations that the Jewish Agency has been working with for the longest amount of time, the Fisher Foundation. Max Fisher was one of the founding chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel from outside. His foundation called. I remember the phone call. It was on Friday, right before I was about to light Shabbat candles, and they said, "Can you come on the phone?" And they tried to think about what Max Fisher would have done had he been alive. And they gave us a gift from their corpus. That is almost unheard of in the world of philanthropy, to pull from your corpus to give a gift that was large enough to be meaningful in their minds.
Wow.
I couldn't even respond. I was so I think just philanthropy responded in a way that probably saved a huge part of Israel.
And I think it's important to note, like, as you were saying, I mean, obviously before the war began, there were so many organizations doing so many different things, whether it be, helping Jews in the diaspora, helping Jews within Israel, coexistence kinds of groups. There were all these different groups. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of them didn't survive. And it's kind of a credit to the Jewish Agency itself that not only did it stay, not only did it help, but it also... what it sounds like is it even was strengthened in this time where that wasn't an obvious thing, which is very special.
The Jewish Agency was strengthened, and it tried to strengthen the field. So we raise money, for instance, what we call group interventions, to work on trauma therapy with groups of people around Israel. These aren't services we provide ourselves. We want to subcontract with all the mental health providers in Israel to provide that industry. So sometimes we make very conscious and strategic decisions, or we say we have a great ability to raise the money, but we want to strengthen the players in the field and not just strengthen our own activities.
So if we kind of move forwards a little bit in the timeline.
Yeah.
So we had October 7th, multiple wars with Iran. We're coming off of the biggest, longest war with Iran that we had so far. And one could say, it started over a year ago, or it started in February. And again, it's another piece to the puzzle. So what was happening then?
I think this time around was really different from a philanthropy standpoint. I think a lot of things have been happening. First of all, I think a lot of Jews, how you say you give until it hurts. I think they did. I think a lot of Jews gave until it hurt. And now we're 2.5 years, almost 3 years after they started doing that. And I think there's a bit of donor fatigue. Mm-hmm. I think that there's a political element to this in America, which, sometimes puts people in an uncomfortable position about, on one hand, however they feel about politics and policy in America and how that impacts Israel. I think that because Israel itself did not publicize how awful the damage was here, both to buildings, to individuals, people, when I would talk to people and I would say, yeah, I saw, a missile fell and impacted 200 buildings, they'd be like, come on, we didn't hear about that. Mm. How can that be true? I mean, not that they were doubting the authenticity of what I was saying, but it's not on the news in America, and it's not on the news even in Israel.
Yeah.
And so, people just didn't know. And then I'll go back to saying, but our, closest partners and friends, as always, did step up. But I definitely felt like there was a distance this time between what was happening on the ground in Israel and the response of philanthropy. I actually wrote a little op-ed about it a few weeks ago because I felt so strongly about it.
For the Jerusalem Post?
No, for a different publication. It still counts, right?
Oh.
Okay.
No, of course.
So, But yeah, I did. And I was discussing it actually with my counterpart at the JDC. And he's like, I feel the exact same way. Like there was a trend of wanting to shout from the rooftops, guys, we're drowning here.
And it's almost like the build up and pile on of it after so many years, because it's not just there is damage here. It's also a huge economic crisis where people aren't working, people are in Miloim, they have to be home with their children. I mean, those are just like the main things, but, you know, it continues on. And it is, you know, a really difficult thing, but I'm glad that there's the partners that you can trust and that, you know, stay with you. I know that also within your role, you know, you travel to different Jewish communities, meet with different beneficiaries. I know that you were in Kiryat Shmona recently. What was that experience like?
So I was in Kiryat Shmona and Chatzor HaGlilit on Thursday, actually with the Chicago Federation and the professional who heads our Victims of Terror Fund and the chairman. And honestly, it was pretty horrible. It was a few hours before whatever ceasefire was declared. I thought in the room it was a huge amount of, if I can say, just feeling of PTSD, everyone around the table, whether it was the beneficiaries or, frankly, the people from the municipality itself. You know, I think that the North feels very forgotten. You know, life went back to normal for us here in Jerusalem and certainly in Tel Aviv, and they're very, very forgotten. And we were talking to the mayor, and out of a city of 24,000 people, I think he said, you know, there are 12,000 there now.
Wow.
You know, that's not sustainable to create any sort of atmosphere in the city. And Chatzor HaGlili was another story because he was saying he finds himself at the 11-kilometer mark and all of the government resources are going towards the 0 to 9. And his line, and I'll quote him, he said, Hezbollah sees us on the map, but the Israeli government doesn't. You know, and so he's not getting any resources, even though he had 500 missiles fall or come in his direction this time. So, you know, the Jewish Agency has to think about how we can share that story with the world and bring resources and help in any way we can.
Is there a political element to what the Jewish Agency can do?
No, the Jewish Agency is not political. We work with every single party in the Knesset. We have our board. I'll just say a word. Our board is the most representative body in the Jewish world. We have representatives from every single political party, and we work with every government. I believe we have something like 27 contracts from 14 government ministries.
And like the thing that unites.
The Jewish Agency is the body that unites all Jews, and we might not always agree, and sometimes our boards get animated, but we can all agree that the most important things to us are the state of Israel and the Jewish people. So that's where we can meet.
Yeah. If we kind of go into a little bit about where the funds go, especially in this time. I mean, we're speaking right now at a really critical point. Let's say, you know, we're talking about over the past couple of months, what kind of things have been achieved with the funds that have been raised?
So I mentioned earlier, we have a fund for the victims of terror. So whenever there is a crisis, the first thing we do is open a fund. We opened a special one because it's a war. We called it the Roaring Lion Fund, very original. And the first thing that we do is we come to victims within 48 hours of either their home being destroyed, so much so that they cannot live in it for a long period of time, God forbid, lost a family member, or they were injured and in the hospital, and we come to them and bring them an initial check and say, the Jews of the world are thinking about you. And then we work with them. We assign them somebody from our fund staff who will help them. You know, you can imagine people in trauma don't even know how to access the services that they require from the government. So we'll hold their hand through that process and then offer them another sum of money that they can use towards their rehabilitation. So that's one thing that we do. And again, that's something that we've done for 22 years, and it's a huge amount of money, frankly.
It's a real hug, I think. Like, it's something that comes as an embrace of, like, we see you. Even if there's not a lot we can do, this is something we can do.
The whole idea was that Jews around the world kept watching. It actually began during the Second Intifada and then during the Lebanon War, where, you know, Jews outside of Israel would look on their TV screens and feel really helpless. Like, how can we help Jews in Israel? Well, we can't be there to physically give them a hug, but if we can send the Jewish Agency with a check and tell them that we're thinking about them. And I have been on endless visits where we've physically handed people checks, And all we say is, we want you to know that Jews of the world are thinking of you. It's not just a line. We actually say it.
What are the responses like?
I had no idea. And I'll tell you something else. And this happened in Chatzor Glili. We brought in somebody, a beneficiary, and he said, I need to tell you, you're all representatives of the Jewish Agency. I need to tell you, the Jewish Agency was the first one to come. And I turned to the person sitting next to me and I said, I never get tired of hearing that, that we were always the first people to respond. And we're not coming instead of the government. We're coming to be a bridge until the government can respond in the way that it needs to. So I never get tired of hearing that. And so this fund that we raise is always the biggest part. We also have raised funds to assist sort of weaker municipalities in their long-term solutions. A lot of these municipalities are not in a position. Tel Aviv, thank God, is a strong municipality and will know how to deal with the long-term trauma needs of its citizens. Many of these municipalities, as we know, who's been hit in this war, don't have the resources to do that, don't have the wherewithal, don't even know how to begin to address trauma. And so we'll be assisting those municipalities, again, work with us, not a blank check, but to work on, what we can do in the long term. And of course, we have to worry about, like I said, the populations that live under our care, whether it's Olim, whether it's elderly people. Elderly people weren't leaving their home to buy groceries.
Right.
So if they're living under the care of the Jewish Agency, we have to do that. And many, many, many other initiatives that we believed it was our unique role to play during this time. And that's on top of the agenda that we had going on for 2026 before this started.
Right. If people are watching this and they kind of are having the feeling that maybe they want to help, where's the best place to start?
So please go on to the Jewish Agency website, and there's a place that you can donate there. But I think that the best way to get assistance to Israelis directly would be through our fund, through the Roaring Lion Fund. Go on. The money goes directly to Israeli citizens. We facilitate that. And we make sure that they know that you're thinking about them.
Danyelle, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you.
and for sharing with us the special work that the Jewish Agency does. And I hope to see you again soon.
That would be nice. Thank you.